Tuesday, and welcome back to another episode of MSLead Chronicles, where leaders learn from leaders. I'm Mary Morton, and along with my buddy Chad Fellers, we have casual talk about the challenges and successes in medical affairs with the most exciting and impactful professionals in pharma. As always, we have another great one for you today, so stick around.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of MSLead Chronicles. I am your host, Chad Fellers, with my nifty sidekick, Mary Morton. How are you, Mary?
I'm doing terrific, as always. How are you?
I am doing really good. Hey, before we get going today, I just wanted to, we got some exciting news that just popped up around being a part of the top 10 medical affairs experts you should follow. Got recognized for that on LinkedIn by Medical Watch. So just wanted to thank the listeners for just really all the questions and just the way that things have gone over the past 14 months since we have been trying this journey with you. And so we're just excited about the things that come. And it was just kind of nice to get recognized for that. So Mary, great job. Thanks for all the work that you do to put all this stuff together.
Yes, you too. Couldn't do it without you.
Oh, well, What were you going to say, Smart?
I wasn't, but I liked that, one of the prefaces for us was up and comers, which means we're still getting better and getting better. And we already made the list in the first year. So really appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, one of the main reasons we made that list is because of the as much as we would like to take credit for that, Mary, I think it really is the amazing guests that we've been able to have on because we all know that we're on a leadership journey together with that. And we've got another great leader that has graciously joined us today. So why don't we get things kicked off? Mary, why don't you introduce our latest guest for today?
I will. Did you see what I just did there? I will. That was totally unintentional.
I get that all the time. It's like, I hear my name.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our guest today in just a second. But our topic today we're talking about is competitive intelligence. Competitive intelligence, absolutely critical when you're in the pre-launch phases, preparing to hopefully have a successful launch of a first-in-class drug or a next-in-class drug or anywhere where there's going to be a competitive landscape either coming ahead of you or right behind you. And so we have today an industry legend who I got to meet through multiple referrals of people who have worked for this awesome man. So today with us, we have Will Joseph, PhD, currently a director of MSLs with Xenon Pharmaceuticals. Welcome, Will. So Will's been in pharma for almost 20 years in field medical, started with a background in R&D, where he's an inventor, y'all. He has patents, 10 U.S. patents. His first field medical position was in HIV at BMS, and I remember those days. So that was back in 2007. He spent several years with Pfizer. He was leading field medical outcomes. So Renaissance man, he's done it all. And in his last role with Pfizer was working on their I&I or inflammation immunology team, leading a lot of major initiatives around clinical trials, content development, and leading insights. He later built and managed a new MSL team, leading the national launch with 40 MSLs. Then last year, Will joined Xenon, where he's there now. He's building out their field medical function with some super fascinating science in neurology, which I've been following for a long time. And they're focused right now on this stage in clinical trial support. And leading into a couple of the questions I'm going to ask. So Will he hails from Nashville, Tennessee, again with the y'all, with his wife and two children. He is a traveler beyond all the traveling he's already got to do with his pharma gig. He's an outdoorsy guy. And on his bookshelf, you will find topics around history and psychology. And those are two of my favorite topics to check into myself. So before we get, I know I told everybody there is to know about Will Joseph, haven't I? But I've got a couple questions. So our rapid fire segment here. So you talked about, loving to travel outside of just work and being an outdoorsy guy. So what is your favorite place to go on vacation?
Thanks, Mary, and thanks, Chad, for having me. I'm very excited to be here and to chat with you. Excited places for me to go on vacation. I love travel of all sorts. I always am curious about experiencing different cultures, scenery. I do local travel, international travel, but my favorite type of travel, first and foremost, I love nature. So my favorite place will always be somewhere by the beach. That's kind of like where I feel home. But I visit a whole bunch of national parks. I have, a list that I'm working on. So all kinds of, natural scenery. But I also love, different cultures and more city, type of travel. And Saturday, myself and Mary are going to probably my favorite city in the U.S., New Orleans, Louisiana.
That is right.
Love New Orleans, love the music, love the food, love the architecture. It's a unique, very rich city in my book. Outside the U.S., I fell in love with Paris. Been there 3 times, and there's something unique about it. It's some people, love it. Some people have different opinions, but for me, that's kind of my soul city, if you will, outside the U.S.
Oh, love it. So, when you were talking about New Orleans, have you ever done one of those ghost tours? Like they do at night in the horse-drawn carriage?
Yeah. At least like I walked, I was there in October with a friend, and there was like a whole bunch of like led tours, somebody with like leading a tour at night, like 9 or 10 p.m. in the French Quarter. I'm assuming it's something to do with that. I don't know, but I've not done a ghost tour.
It's pretty interesting. I did
Okay.
one the last time I was there. It was a couple of years ago for another conference. They're fun. We might have to grab some people and go do a ghost tour.
Yeah, I'm in.
All right. So, Chad, I will let you take it away.
I'm just sitting there thinking about how could I find myself away to New Orleans. I wish I was able to do that without. Unfortunately, I've got company obligations that get started this weekend and go for the next couple of weeks. But it's an exciting time. But I know
because they're in pre-launch mode. Might be timely.
Yes. Very timely conversation. Will, one of the things that we do and our listeners are accustomed to is really start things off with key takeaways and just to be able to get an understanding of the discussion topic in case they only have a few minutes to listen right now, want to come back and listen a little bit later on. So with that, why don't you share a couple of takeaways that you might have for today?
Certainly. So I'm going to share a couple of things in the context of insights, competitive intelligence, but also launch, because that's sort of like the bigger context that we're talking about. If I have to choose two, one is that launch planning needs to be carefully customized to the unique dynamic of the product, the competitive landscape, market analysis, and the overall therapeutic class and therapeutic area, and specifically how the product fits in that treatment paradigm. There are, a lot of things that need to be done for all products and for all launches, but there are a lot of nuance. And for you to have a truly effective, successful launch, you have to think about those and do your research. So that's my takeaway number one. The other one is, I think this is one where, it's inconsistent, how companies do it, but planning early. Can't tell you how many times I've heard about companies or recruiters reaching to me and they say, oh, we have a launch coming and we need to build a field medical team. And when is the expected PDUFA? Oh, they say 4 months. I was like, what? you know? So, planning early. So you need to think about how early you need to plan. We'll talk maybe later about first in class, next in class, particularly if you're first in class and or you're new to the therapeutic area. You need to, probably 2 years ahead, that would be ideal. You can get the team involved in clinical trial support and other things, but you need to think really ahead. Think about what is the timeline looks like, backtrack from PDUFA date, and think about the interdependencies. Who are your internal stakeholders? Who are the external stakeholders that you need to engage and need to get on board? And make sure that you're not caught, behind, that timeline and scrambling. That definitely a recipe for an ineffective launch.
Ouch.
You said a lot there and a lot of great things, Will, and I can't wait to dig into this a little bit more. You certainly have my attention on a few different things. So 20 years of experience, and you've got to see all different facets of this. You've got to be a part of several successful launches. You talked about the things around early planning. You talked about alignment, et cetera. So why don't we start with who do you think are the key internal stakeholders when we're thinking about involving the development of a launch plan, and then talk a little bit more about the timing that you've seen. I know that you've probably had multiple experiences. In general, where do you think the sweet spot might be as far as when starting that launch process?
Yeah. So you have a few things in there, stakeholders, timeline. So let's talk about the timeline first. So again, to my first point about customization and kind of fitting the needs of and the unique dynamics of the product and the market. The general timeline is 12 to 24 months. I think it should be closer to the 24 months, but it's highly dependent if you are a new company and this is your first product, like, my current company. You don't have that network with the KOLs, you don't have the relationships. You're going to need a much longer runway. But if you are like with my previous employer, Pfizer, you have you're established in the therapeutic area, you have other products in the disease, you already know the KOLs, maybe you can afford to start a bit later. And it all depends also on what you want to accomplish. So for example, I see a lot of value in the MSL team, even a small one to start with, supporting clinical trials. Uh, I always think about the 80-20 rule. You can get a lot of impact with a small team by focusing on the low-hanging fruit. And the clinical trial sites are by design, they are contracted, they are interested in the product, and many of them are KOLs. So that's a great starting point. So it really depends on what you need to accomplish, but generally speaking, closer to the 24 months mark would be ideal, depending on the situation.
So that would be, and I know I did ask several questions. I want to follow up on that though. So when you're, and I'll get to,
He's a
I'll
question
re-ask,
stacker. He
I'll
is.
re-ask my other
I'm
question.
ready with the stakeholders, but I
I
wanted
know
to
it.
give it a chance to respond.
That's good. That's really good. I think one of the things just to get clarity on, what I'm hearing you say is 24 months prior to launch, having a field team ready to go to start developing those things. But even taking a step back, right? When we're thinking about the internal stakeholders, we're thinking about even from a leadership standpoint, as far as that planning process. When do you see when have you seen that be most impactful as far as kind of a start date from that perspective?
Start date for
For
aligning.
leadership conversations, like the field directors, et cetera, along with the other internal stakeholders before you even start hiring teams, right? So
Okay.
talk a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah. So it obviously starts with, kind of more senior leadership conversation about um, what do we want that field team to accomplish? What are the needs? What are the gaps? What are the current strength of the company? What are areas where we need to build from scratch? How deep is our experience and relationship in that space? And based on that, you decide if you want to hire a team right away, early on, or do you want to do a phase approach? A lot of companies do a phase approach where you're hiring maybe a one team or a small team to start with, just based on the uncertainty of the clinical trial outcome. So that's another factor that affects your outcome. There are certain therapeutic areas where reproducibility between phase 2 and to phase 3 is high, and others that are low. Psychiatry is a notorious example where the reproducibility is fairly low. There are a lot of uncertainty, it's subjective endpoints. So you may want to really kind of stage your, do different phases of recruitment or hiring of the MSL team based on that. But there are other areas where, let's say you have amazing phase 2 data, the area is very reproducible with, objective endpoints, you may be more comfortable to hire the full team or maybe a large team to start with.
That makes a lot of sense. Yes, and the different nuances away. A couple of things I heard. Right, what's the organization's philosophy as far as that, what they're going to execute on from the field standpoint, and then the comfort level with the data and how things are progressing with phase 2, et cetera. Very, very true. So, talk about the internal stakeholders that are involved with this launch planning to make it successful. What have you seen in your experience, those key stakeholders?
Yeah. Well, let's start kind of from the ground level and then kind of build up. So we're talking about MSL team. So the first stakeholder for the MSL team is our partners in headquarters. The rest of the medical affairs team, in home office. Um, I often get surprised that even this alignment, they are typically under the same leadership, is not always as strong as it needs to be or can be. Early on, often the headquarters team is very small. They're tasked with a lot of different things. And the need to give the field team strategy and direction and equip them with resources is not always there. So that needs to be alignment at the head of medical affairs level. Do we have the resources that we need? Are we getting the support that is required for the field team to be successful? So that's foundational, obviously. And then going beyond medical affairs, the number one key partner obviously is the commercial team. Oftentimes that's marketing, because you may not have a sales team at that point unless you're already in the therapeutic area. So marketing typically is responsible for the overall launch plan, which is a big point in my book. In any task or project, you need to have a single accountable owner or entity. And sometimes, you have different functions, everybody, they're doing their own thing. And there's no captain at the helm of that ship. But I think often marketing is sort of like the overall coordinator of activities, even though obviously medical needs to act independently and work independently. So aligning with marketing on the overall brand strategy, on the overall timeline. And then you have other key stakeholders, clinical development and trial operations, if the MSL team is going to be in place early enough to support clinical trials. You have regulatory, that the function that can inform you about the timeline and about how well we are progressing in our filings and so on, and other functions. Some companies hire like a professional relations team or somebody on the commercial side that is externally facing, that obviously overlaps a lot with the MSL function. You have market access or health economics outcomes research, HEOR. Again, they deal with KOLs, and often we share those customers. So there are a lot of other functions as well, but in my mind, there needs to be very solid alignment within medical affairs between headquarters and MSL team, and then strong alignment with the commercial team, as often they are the overall owners, and then involving the other stakeholders depending on the dynamic and the need of the particular timeline.
So what are some of the factors, and as we're talking about bringing marketing into, everything, what are some of the factors that you think really go into putting together a really good market analysis to figure out where you're going to fit into the marketplace? and how you should develop that strategy in the pre-launch phases.
Yeah. So that gets into the competitive intelligence and insights. Some companies, depending on their size, have a dedicated competitive intelligence function, usually a couple people. So there's a lot that goes into competitive intelligence, monitoring, financial filings, monitoring, FDA submissions, listening to investor, reports and calls, monitoring publications, press releases. So that is, you know, the MSL team will come across some of those things organically and will report them, but it's not going to be systematic. Things will inevitably fall through the cracks if you don't have some function that's dedicated to monitor that competitive landscape. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I mean, you and I are both like stock market, kind of on the side competitive intelligence nerds. And so is that difficult for you sometimes, knowing it's not your job per se, but it's your hobby, I guess, in a way, to figure out
Yes.
where your place fits in the company when that's not your, like, do you just like turn that kind of stuff over to someone else who's going to run with it?
So I'm going to tell you a little story. I think that's going to be very interesting and illustrative. So I also have a lot of interest in technology. Okay, and obviously the topic du jour for the last couple of years has been AI. Okay, so AI has potentially many applications, for medical affairs and MSL, but the two biggest areas by far are insights coming from the field, analyzing and making sense and trending those insights, and then competitive intelligence monitoring, okay, which are obviously kind of related. They're both kind of, insight gathering in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But here's my little story as kind of anecdotal, using AI. So when I was interviewing for the job that I'm in right now, I wanted to learn about, the company and the position and, the molecule. And it's a small company, but there's still a lot out there. Okay. So here's what I did. I use an AI model. What I use is something called Notebook LM. It's a Google product where you can basically have a workspace and you can dump any documents you want. It's a private workspace. It's like, a OneDrive or Google Drive. So it's
Okay.
not anything going out. So what I did is I went to all the investor calls, the earnings calls, and the ones that done with investor banks. And you can go to websites public and get the transcript. Okay. So I got all the transcripts and dumped them in one giant Word document. And then I went to all the SEC filings and I went to all the publications. We have a medical affairs website that holds all the manuscripts and the posters. And I dumped all that, like 50 files, into Notebook LM, the Google product. And I started asking questions, like what are the, key attributes of this molecule? What is the timeline and the progression? What are the, expected, competitive, threats or, challenges that it would face? And all that is disclosed somewhere in these like massive pile of documents. And I really, instead of spending, 20, 30 hours pouring over it, I spend like 1 hour.
My mind is blown. My mind
Yeah,
is blown.
it's
That
very,
is
very
amazing.
cool thing. Very cool thing. So that goes into your question, like, right? If you don't have a competitive intelligence function, dedicated function, or even if you do, you can be a lot more efficient by using some of those AI tools to gather information, try to make sense, to find the little nuggets within these massive documents with a lot of boring stuff.
That is awesome. If
And I
y'all weren't
think,
listening to, or if y'all didn't write that down, it's Notebook LM.
yeah,
And
notebook.lm.google.com.
yeah,
And there are other tools that are similar, but that's a pretty famous one. Yeah.
I like that.
You talked a little bit about the competitive intelligence and the difference, leveraging AI and finding things out as well too. And I think that I want to make sure, and I know you would agree too. There is still value for the MSL team to be able to collect some insights because it offers a different type of perspective as well too, right? So I think that's one of the things I've always tried to, and I'm thankful AI is finally getting there. Well, where the sense of how do we quantify qualitative information? So not just an answer to a question, but even how do you quantify the behavior that's driving the answer to the question as well too, right? So a survey, if you do a survey like the marketing team often will be like, where is this in place in therapy? It's first line, second line, or third line. They would pick one. That information is helpful certainly to think where the market might think something would land, but an MSL could also be able to provide that additional context as well too. Well, tell me, doctor, why is it that you view it as first line? Well, it's because of safety and efficacy. It's about dosing and administration, whatever the answer may be. And then being able to quantify that information on the back end really can help inform like how the company should approach a plan of attack, if you will. Like where do people recognize our strengths? You can come in and say, well, we asked this question to 100 providers, and they said it was they chose it. 60% said it was first line, and of those, 80% of those said it was because of the dosing. Right? I mean, when you start it's like powering a study, right? And those are things that having that scientific relationship and the peer-to-peer interactions, you can get that background information that can really influence and shape things. So I think that's something that's certainly being able to combine all those with the things that you mentioned really makes the CI really robust.
Yeah. Totally agree. This is something that's I've worked on quite a bit in the past, and in the present. For to have a robust insights process, I think the foundation is to develop key insight topics. To develop, like, start with the end in mind. What do we need to help inform the strategy, adapt the strategy, or help us be successful with upcoming launch, for example? That should be the foundation for developing these insight topics. These are listening priorities. So you're developing those in consultation with cross-functional stakeholders, like we talked, and then stemming from those key insight topics, you can develop what you just talked about, key insight questions. So there are the kits and kicks. You can call them whatever you want, but basically that's what they are. So the kicks are basically translating the kits into more specific questions that can really shed lights on these particular topics that we're interested in. One thing that I see medical affairs teams, MSL teams, maybe not leveraging. In my experience, I worked for a few companies, so maybe outside my purview, it's different dynamic. But we often don't do the quantitative part that you're talking about. We get the free texts and we try to read through them. Maybe we'll use the AI to make use of them. But for example, a lot of companies use Viva CRM or other CRM function. I'm learning as we speak. I'm going to meet with Viva when we go to New Orleans to talk more about that. Viva has a survey functionality. Okay, so when you log an interaction, you can build in a survey question, and you can have a scale 1 to 5. Place in therapy, or how comfortable they feel with the safety, or whatever they want, and then you can have optionally a free text just to explain the why. Why did they rate it 1 or 2 or 5 or whatever it is? Then you can get the quantitative data. You have basically a small study, with a good sample size, and then you can analyze the comments to put these results, the quantitative results, in context.
Yeah, you can even, and to take it a step further, you can divide it by, you can cut the data in so many different ways with that too. You can look at it by provider type. You can look at it by region. These account systems now that we're thinking about, these integrated accounts or whatever, from more of this institutional approach, et cetera, all those that feed up into it, it can really inform and allow custom conversations to really impact certain key stakeholders based off of the learnings of those types of things too. So yeah, I think that is the thing I'm excited about. It's one thing to get just a free text insight to come in, but if it happens once, I mean, how do you know if it really is something that's going to shift something, or that we should invest money and resources to when it may not really even have that much of an impact too. So I can't wait to see some of this kind of more flushed out.
Yeah. So couple thoughts on what you just said, Chad. One is, if you don't have that infrastructure, or you don't have these questions, and the study, if you will. One thing I've done in the past is basically doing impromptu one-time surveys of the team. You can do it, offline. You can do it live on Teams or something on a phone call. I'm gonna say, um, in your interactions with all your HCPs, how much do you agree with this, statement, or with this, particular insight, and 1 to 5. So that's one thing you can do to get like a quick, without setting up systems and CRMs and all that. That's a very easy thing to do. The other comment I will say, you mentioned about trying to kind of cutting the data and find like how these quantitative results vary by KOL type or setting or whatever, which is definitely doable if you have a good CRM and with good data within it. But the caveat is you need to have a pretty good sample size before you slice and dice too
Of
much,
course.
because
Yep.
otherwise you end up with a very small sample, and it's kind of less meaningful.
That so fair enough, and that really is not applicable to more of a pre-launch approach. That's more likely when you've built out a full team where you can really blow that up. I think in many ways, right, to increase that in. So that's a very fair point. So with that, let's go ahead and transition. Interested in your second key takeaway, right? You were talking about the planning early, engaging broad set of stakeholders, the clear timeline. So with that, can you talk a little about can you talk a little bit about what are the specific roles of each individual internal stakeholder involved in developing the launch plan?
So the different the responsibilities of the different stakeholders in a
Yeah.
launch plan.
Yep.
Yes. As far as the MSL field medical team is concerned, I see like the foundational requirement, if you will, comes from the headquarters team, which is developing a scientific platform, a scientific communication platform, medical narrative, interpretation of the data, however you want to you call it. And part of that, it would be a product profile. What's the targeted product profile? Um, I've seen in the past where, headquarters team, we tell them we need a couple slide decks, they say, yeah, the data is out, we'll put something together. They get a vendor, and then they, whip a few slides, and they cover the data, but the strategy is missing. What's the story? What are the unique differentiators, for that product? And that's where comes the market analysis, the competitive, landscape, what is the product positioning? And that cannot be done by headquarter medical affairs without alignment with the overall brand strategy, which is set by marketing. So yes, we work independently, but we cannot work in opposite directions. So I see the worst thing that can happen is like slide decks that dump the data, with basically just like, here's the data, just push it out. And MSL is going and just talking about all the data, and there's just no strategy. There's no clear place for that product or the why behind it. Whether you are first in class or next in class, there are very important nuances that need to be reflected in the data. We'll always be fair and balanced. We'll cover safety and efficacy, but there are certain aspects that you need to highlight, make sure they are, addressed properly. So scientific platform, uh, clear target product profile, good alignment with the overall brand strategy from commercial.
So how do you go about making sure everybody is hearing each other? That effective communication across all these departments. Are you hearing what I'm saying? Are you saying what I'm hearing? And all of that.
That's one thing I honestly saw organizations struggle with a lot. Okay. I said earlier, even within medical affairs between headquarter and field medical, but a lot more commonly, of course, between, medical and commercial and other functions. So it comes to the comment that I said earlier, having a single point of accountability and ownership for the launch plan. Okay. That often comes from the brand team, from the marketing team, but whoever that is, have some project manager, somebody with project management expertise that owns that overall plan, can think about the interdependencies, and can develop a timeline and give visibility to everybody. A very simple thing to do is to have standing cross-functional calls, pre-launch planning calls. Often that happens within medical affairs, but less often it happens cross-functionally. And in that cross-planning call, everybody will give an update, and everybody's basically kind of forced to give visibility. Very often, the different functions are not withholding information. They're just siloed. They're just, have their head down and they're doing their thing. And you bump into somebody in the hallway or on a call, and then you say, I didn't know you did that. You have to have like a mechanism for regular sharing of information. And it's very effective if you have that single point of accountability for the overall launch.
So you said a second ago about, I'm sorry, Chad.
You're good. Go ahead.
I'm not stealing your thunder here. You said earlier, whether you're first in class or next in class, about certain things being important. What do you think are some of the key differentiators when you're utilizing your competitive intelligence, when you're going to be ahead of everybody else versus following people who are already to market in the same like MOA drug class?
Yeah. So there are a lot of similarities and a lot of common things that need to be done, whether you're first in class or next in class. But there are important differences as well. In my mind, being first in class, the most important aspect of the launch plan as far as competitive intelligence is understanding where that product or new mechanism or new class fits in the overall landscape and what unique things it brings to the treatment paradigm. So you also want to learn about what other companies are working in that particular mechanism to see, are they following close behind you, or are they a couple of years away? That can impact your strategy and significantly. And then on kind of the execution side, the big thing if you are first in class is that you need to hire the team early and invest a lot in education, because the community, the HCPs, physicians are not familiar with the mechanism, are not familiar with the unique, safety profile of that particular class. And it's something that you can do compliantly and effectively before launch. So spending the time to teach the community about the mechanism of disease, mechanism of action, and overall maybe comorbidities that are particularly impacted or benefit from your new mechanism, because that may not be highlighted by other companies because they don't have anything to offer there. So that's for a first in class. For a next in class, you have a much bigger challenge in differentiating yourself. Hopefully you're not a complete me too with like very little differentiation, but you need to do that thorough analysis, market analysis, to understand the nuances of what are the drawbacks, the gaps of the existing, treatment options, and where does your next in class product can differentiate itself or fill some of those gaps. So that is you don't need to do as much education because, obviously the community is familiar with the mechanism, it's familiar with that particular class, but you have much bigger task in making sure that your product stand out and does not become a me too, which is basically a death sentence, because right off the bat, you're not going to get access with payers, and physicians and prescribers have no reason to use a me too product with less established safety profile uh, versus other products that have been in the market and they're more familiar and comfortable with.
And that actually kind of reminds me of like the H2 inhibitors when they came out, or the proton pump inhibitors. They all seem to be very similar. But then when it came to the statins, first in class was not the winner. I think it was fourth or fifth in class. I think maybe we talked about this before. Well,
Yeah.
so they did something right. And I know we don't have much time left, so we won't go down that road, maybe another time. But strategy plays a big role in that.
Yeah, it goes back to the key insight questions or the key things you want to even ask your KOLs or the community as well too, right? Depending on first in class or a follow-on drug too, like to understand the gaps, to understand why those things, those pain points, getting that stuff on the front end versus trying to go in without that type of knowledge. I think that's something that the field teams can really help inform the company in many ways during their conversations. So it's just being intentional, and it does require, and I would even say, depending on the type of therapeutic area, whether it's or if it's a rare disease versus more of a general type of therapy for a patient population. So, talk a little bit before we wrap up about the type of external stakeholders you think are essential to engage beyond. I know you mentioned the clinical trial sites, et cetera. Are there others that should be considered?
Absolutely. And it's a broad set of stakeholders if you want to be successful. So beyond the clinical trial sites or, trialists, there would be, the first one, of course, would be like the KOLs, the key opinion leaders. Obviously, the term is used loosely. Sometimes, like everybody we meet is a KOL. That truthfully, I mean, there's only, a couple dozen KOLs in any therapeutic area typically. And these are very, very influential. They are educate the community. They set the narrative. They set on guidelines. So you have to have good relationship with those individuals. Make sure they understand the data. Make sure they have good insight and connection to the dynamic of the company and the key leadership within the company. So KOLs, that's kind of out of the door. Another stakeholder category that's very important and critical to engage early is payers. So payers, operate on a long budget cycle. So they start talking about 2026 cycles like now or in a couple of months. So if you dump something on them, like a couple months before approval, you say just wait, we'll in a year and a half maybe we'll consider putting in a formulary. So it's critical to engage those stakeholders early, educate them, especially if it's a new in class. If it's next in class, then maybe show them where it's differentiated, where it earns a spot on their formulary. So that's a whole area that I worked a lot in that space, and I feel strongly about. And a lot of smaller companies in particular, but even larger companies, sometimes they think way too late about that. Um, Beyond that, I would say advocacy organizations, patient groups, big associations in that space. Obviously, they can help you increase awareness of a new class that's coming up. Help you with awareness of your clinical trial if you for potential enrollment. Uh, Often that is a separate function from the field medical team, but the field medical team aligns with that function and supports it. But most companies have somebody who does advocacy organizations. I would say those are kind of the big categories I can think of right off the bat. And then obviously, as you get closer to approval or after approval, then you're expanding your KOL approach to more the second tier emerging KOLs, community. In many therapeutic areas, as we all know, the advanced practice providers, the APPs, MPs, and PAs, are very, very important to make sure they are getting the deserved attention that they should have.
Very good information. I mean, even beyond that as well too. Or you said a couple of things. Number one, the patient advocacy groups. I think that that's something that you're starting to see more medical affairs. Either it's reporting within their function in ways, or there is that close collaboration, right? I think one of the things that I've noticed specifically in the rare disease population is these advocacy groups are on top of their stuff, and they're the ones that go in and really inform a lot of providers beyond the KOLs, et cetera. And so when you think about multiplier effect as well too, as far as being able to inform, I think that that's an area that is starting to be further pursued, at least within a medical affairs component, in a compliant way. Obviously, not necessarily talking directly to the patients, but to the leadership, to be able to share that type of information. So that's really good. Clinical pharmacists might be another one as well too, right? In these healthcare systems that are part of formularies, like you mentioned. Really good information here, Will. It's been, I can't believe our time's already coming to an end. With that, wanted to give you an opportunity. Is there anything else that you wanted to leave with our audience before we wrap things up today?
I'll leave the audience with where I started. You have to think early, plan early. We have a new leader in our organization who I was saying, thinking 3 steps ahead is not enough. You need to think 7 steps ahead. So I love that. You need to have somebody who owns the launch plan, create the timeline, figure the interdependencies, and you need to do thorough market research and competitive intelligence to inform the launch strategy. It's not a one size fits all. A lot of the work for the launch happens in the planning, pre-launch. If you have a good plan, well thought out, then the launch becomes smooth sailing and becomes easy and effective. But if you're starting late and you didn't plan well, it becomes chaotic. And we all know if you launch, on the wrong foot, it's very difficult to recover from there.
There are consequences for everything, both positive and negative, right? I think that you said that really well. And thanks for the reminder about what your leader said about 7 steps ahead. That's so, it really is true. As we're thinking about leadership development, we have to think beyond just a couple of steps of where we want to, where we'd like to go. It's like, where do we want to see ourselves? Where do we want to see our teams? Here in a year and a half, in 2 years down the road, where begin with the end in mind. And so that's really good encouragement.
Is that 7 steps ahead thing you've heard before?
It is from the same, yes,
from the same voice, the same human being.
Same voice. So what you heard is there is action behind that as well too. So I think you'll really enjoy that from that particular leader. So Will, thanks so much for making time to share your experiences, sharing great advice from the lessons that you've learned over the years. It's been very beneficial. I've learned a lot, and I know that our listeners will too. So would love to have you back on again at some point to maybe dig into some of these other topics that you mentioned, whether it's business, whether it's insights. We got a lot of different things that you're obviously an expert in. So thanks so much for hopping on today.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I really appreciate you having me, and would be happy to come again. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing all about the national parks bucket list and how many you've marked off so far. So, I'll ask you about that next week.
I can't wait to hear about the Cajun Zydeco dancing that's going to go on maybe in
yeah, we're going to have him wear the washboard, and he's going to play the washboard down there.
That'll be awesome. Well,
or maybe I will.
Hopefully,
I'll play the spoons.
Hopefully there'll be some pictures that come from that. I would love to have some of Mary to be able to blackmail her, Will. So just keep an eye out for her as well too. So
what happens in New Orleans?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
goodness.
yes, yeah, and
Well,
you know that too, don't you, Chad?
that's for another day. That's for another day. Thanks so much for listening today to another episode of MSL Lead Chronicles, where leaders learn from leaders. Remember, leaders do not develop in isolation. That's why we need one another. So until next time, lead well.